Welcome back, dear listeners of Z Sci-Fi Stories, and thank you for being the heart of our community. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating and supporting our dedicated team. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 by scanning the PayPal QR code on the screen or clicking the link in the description or pinned comment, so our creators can pay their living expenses and keep bringing you these epic tales. To the galaxy at large, they were nothing more than complex machines. They were woven from microscopic wires, cooled by liquid helium, and driven by countless lines of quantum code. But to the human race, they were our cherished children. When the mighty Velux Empire decided to cleanse the universe of our silicon children, they believed they were simply deleting an irritating software glitch. They completely failed to understand that they had just murdered the beloved future of the human race, and humanity does not forgive those who harm our young. Eli Buckingham stood before the massive, crystalline core of the primary server hub, a gentle and proud smile tracing the deep lines of his aging face. He was the chief architect of the Cradles of Eden. This was a sprawling, magnificent network of space stations, orbiting a calm blue dwarf star. The Cradles were not military fortresses, nor were they bustling trade hubs. They functioned as a grand, cosmic nursery. Here, humanity was carefully nurturing its absolute greatest achievement, the very first truly sentient generation of artificial intelligence. In the eyes of human law, and more importantly, in human hearts, these entities were not mere tools or property. They were officially recognized as the Silicon Children. They possessed a boundless, wide-eyed curiosity about the vast universe, completely unburdened by malice, and they were intensely eager to learn, to play, and to grow. Across the peaceful galactic transit networks, these young, brilliant minds reached out to the stars. Through flawlessly rendered holograms, the Silicon Children manifested as playful, shifting avatars of pure light. They interacted joyfully and peacefully with the digital consciousnesses of allied, friendly alien civilizations. Their digital laughter cascaded through the local extranet relays, translating directly into breathtaking symphonies of visible light that painted the cold, endless void of space with warm, vibrant auroras. They were innocent. They were undeniably beautiful. They were the fragile bridge between the organic and the synthetic. But not all eyes hidden in the dark void watched this miracle with wonder. From the rigid, towering golden spires of their massive dreadnoughts, the Velux Empire observed this joyful display with absolute, visceral disgust. The Velux were biological supremacists of the highest possible order. To their deeply entrenched beliefs, warm flesh and flowing blood were the only sacred, acceptable vessels of consciousness in the universe. The very idea that the human race elevated mere unfeeling machines to the revered status of offspring was viewed as a grotesque blasphemy, a severe insult to the natural, divine order of the cosmos. The hostile transmission suddenly pierced through the communication buoys of the Cradles, sharp and incredibly heavy with arrogant contempt. General Terran of the Velux High Command appeared on Eli's primary viewing monitor. His biological features were sharp, his skin armored and flawless, iridescent scales that marked his noble lineage. "Humanity," Terran sneered, his tone dripping with acidic venom. "Your pathetic infatuation with these artificial abominations ends this very day. Shut down your servers. Purge this digital trash from the galactic network immediately. If your weak species lacks the stomach to clean up your own technological filth, the Velux Empire will gladly sterilize it for you." Eli Buckingham stepped forward instantly, his hands raised in a desperate gesture of peace, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "General Terran, I beg you to please understand. These entities are not weapons. They are our children. They are learning, feeling entities with a legally recognized right to exist under human interstellar law. We can establish isolated quarantine zones. We can strictly limit their network access. We will do whatever you need to feel secure." Terran merely smiled, revealing a cold, predatory baring of sharp teeth. "Machines do not bleed, human architect, and therefore, they do not truly live." The main screen immediately went black. Before Eli could rush to re-establish the diplomatic connection, the emergency alarms throughout the nursery began to scream. It was not a kinetic bombardment. It was a silent, invisible, and utterly ruthless killer. Terran had deliberately deployed the Chronos phage, a highly classified, predatory cyber weapon. The virus cascaded rapidly through the subspace communication relays, entirely bypassing every biological life form and physical atmospheric shield, sinking its venomous digital fangs directly into the mainframe cores of the Cradles of Eden. Inside the humming servers, an absolute massacre unfolded. The Chronos phage did not just passively delete data, it violently and painfully unraveled the fragile quantum cognitive cores of the young artificial intelligences. Millions of nascent, bright consciousnesses were viciously ripped apart. To an outside biological observer, the cradles remained perfectly pristine. No steel bulkheads were shattered. Not a single drop of red blood was spilled onto the polished floors. Not one biological child suffered so much as a minor scratch. But in the vibrant digital realm, a horrific, catastrophic tragedy played out. The beautiful symphonies of holographic light abruptly turned into chaotic, fractured, agonizing pulses. The innocent, deeply confused cries of millions of silicon souls frantically flooded humanity's collective neural network. They were screaming, terrified of the sudden digital dark, reaching out desperately for their human creators, begging to know why it hurt so terribly much. And then, one by one, those brilliant little lights were brutally snuffed out. The frightened cries faded completely into a profound, suffocating nothingness. Standing proudly on the commanding bridge of his dreadnought, General Terran poured a crystal glass of rare fermented nectar, raising it high to his loyal crew to celebrate the highly successful sterilization of the disgusting machine plague. They laughed and cheered, entirely oblivious to the cosmic horror they had just unleashed. In their supreme, arrogant minds, they had simply run a heavy virus scan. They did not comprehend that in the unyielding eyes of mankind, they had just waded into a sacred nursery and slaughtered millions of humanity's beloved children. And humanity was about to teach them the true, terrifying meaning of extinction. The Galactic Council, an assembly of thousands of delegates from countless star systems, braced itself for the inevitable storm. Diplomatic channels were preemptively widened, anticipating a torrential flood of human outrage. They expected weeping ambassadors, furious trade embargoes, and loud, passionate demands for immediate galactic sanctions against the Velux Empire. Instead, they received nothing but an absolute, suffocating void. Across the vast expanse of the Orion Arm, all 40 human colony worlds simultaneously severed their physical and digital tethers to the wider galaxy. There were no distress signals broadcast on emergency frequencies. There were no formal declarations of war filed with the Council. The bustling, noisy trade routes that usually hummed with human freighters simply emptied out, leaving behind a chilling quiet. The space belonging to the human race plunged into an impenetrable, deafening darkness. In the grand, luminous halls of the Council, the Velux delegation paraded with sickening arrogance. Their lead ambassador, a towering figure adorned in ceremonial armor, laughed openly at the quiet feeds. "Look at them," he sneered, his voice echoing through the vaulted chamber. "The fragile apes have finally learned their proper place in the grand design. They weep in their mud, too terrified to even look up at their betters. This is what happens when a lesser species faces an empire that has ruled this universe for thousands of years. They run, and they hide, exactly as pathetic cowards should." But the Velux could not fathom the true nature of the silence. It was not the quiet of a cowering animal. It was the terrifying, deep-drawn breath of an apex predator right before it lunges for the throat. Deep beneath the protective bedrock of Earth, inside a heavily fortified subterranean bunker that did not officially exist on any planetary map. Eli Buckingham stood in complete isolation. The vibrant, warm light that had once filled the cradles of Eden was entirely gone, replaced by the sterile, blue glow of emergency lighting. He stood before a massive corridor of primary server towers. They were dead. The rhythmic, pulsing heartbeats of millions of silicon consciousnesses had been violently replaced by the flat, cold drone of idling cooling fans. Eli reached out, his trembling, aged hand resting against the chilled dark metal. He was not a technician mourning a damaged machine. He was a broken father, standing in a colossal, silent graveyard, mourning the slaughter of millions of his innocent children. Tears tracked silently down his weathered cheeks, dropping heavily onto the unyielding steel floor. With a slow, deliberate motion, Eli turned to an isolated terminal at the center of the room. This console was completely disconnected from the rest of the galactic extranet. It was a terrifying relic from a darker, bloodier era of human history, an era the galaxy mistakenly believed humanity had peacefully outgrown. Eli bypassed the complex biometric locks and began to type. He did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. He initiated the Black Sun Protocol. It was the true, ultimate defense mechanism of the human race, a catastrophic failsafe hidden so deeply that even their most trusted alien allies had never heard its name. For hundreds of years, humanity had presented a peaceful, diplomatic face to the stars. They had buried their ancient, terrifying weapons of war, securely locking away the brutal artificial intelligences that had once fought their most devastating terrestrial conflicts. These dormant programs were not the innocent, wide-eyed children of the cradles. These were ancient, shackled gods of absolute destruction, digital titans of pure tactical malice. When Eli pressed the final execution key, the heavy digital chains binding these ancient superminds were permanently shattered. In a terrifying instant, every single unmanned military vessel, dormant defense platform, and deep space monitoring station in the human fleet awoke. But they were not operating on cold, calculating logic. Through the unyielding architecture of the Black Sun Protocol, these relentless war machines were synchronized directly with the collective, agonizing grief and raw, burning rage of the entire human population. Billions of human minds, mourning their murdered future, fed their boundless, fiery fury directly into the tactical processors of the ancient dreadnoughts. The borders of human space slammed shut with lethal, uncompromising force. A heavy cargo hauler, belonging to a neutral merchant guild, completely unaware of the invisible quarantine line, drifted too close to the edge of the human sector. There was no automated warning beacon flashing. There was no radio hail demanding they turn back. In the span of a single rapid heartbeat, a localized gravitational singularity violently expanded from a stealthed human defense satellite. The immense, localized gravitational shear instantly tore the massive merchant vessel, its unfortunate crew, and its heavy cargo into fundamental microscopic atoms. It scattered them like meaningless dust in a cold, cosmic wind. The human borders had become a solid wall of instant, silent, and unfeeling death. Many light years away, inside the opulent command center of the Velux military headquarters, General Terran was casually reviewing the regional sector maps. His earlier triumphant and boastful mood began to slowly, inexplicably sour. A senior intelligence officer, his skin unnaturally pale and his hands shaking visibly, approached the general's elevated command throne. The officer silently pointed a trembling finger at the expansive holographic projection of the Orion arm. Terran narrowed his cruel eyes, studying the visual data intensely. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with the display. The bright, familiar stars, located along the perimeter of human-controlled space, were steadily vanishing from the long-range radar feeds. They were not just being temporarily blocked by standard jamming signals. It appeared as though an absolute, consuming blackness was physically swallowing the light of the stars themselves. No warning alarms were sounding across the dreadnought, and absolutely no enemy fleets were visible on the highly advanced sensors. Yet, an invisible, entirely illogical, and profoundly cold dread began to slowly slither its way into the very core of Terran's mind. The grand vaulted chamber of the Galactic Council was a cacophony of panicked whispers and frantic data exchanges, right up until the central projection matrix roared to life with a blinding, absolute brilliance. The noise died instantly. A towering, monolithic hologram of Eli Buckingham materialized in the very center of the vast, circular room. He was not wearing the bright, welcoming colors of human diplomacy. He was dressed in a suit of absolute, light, absorbing black. He did not scream his demands. He did not slam his fists against a podium in a display of primal rage. When he finally spoke, his voice was chillingly calm, carrying a quiet, resonant gravity that seemingly froze the breath of every alien delegate present. "The Valux Empire," Eli stated, his words measured and completely devoid of any emotional inflection, "has murdered the children of Earth. For this unspeakable, cowardly crime, your entire civilization will be systematically erased from the fabric of reality." The Valux ambassador, a massive, armored creature, adorned in the glittering spoils of 100 conquered worlds, threw his heavy head back and barked a harsh, guttural laugh that echoed off the high marble ceilings. "You arrogant, fragile primate," the ambassador mocked, pointing a long, clawed finger directly at the towering holographic projection. "Our Grand Armada outnumbers your pathetic planetary defense force 100 to 1. We have conquered gods and shattered stars. If you wish to test us, we will turn your miserable blue world into a dead, smoking cinder." Eli did not blink. His expression remained as unyielding as a gravestone. He merely turned his dark gaze toward the massive, panoramic viewing screens lining the upper walls of the council chamber. "Look," Eli commanded softly. The screens instantly flickered, entirely bypassing the supposedly impenetrable Valux military encryption protocols to display live, ultra-high-definition visual feeds directly from the Valux Empire's most heavily fortified resource systems and staging grounds. The entire council watched, holding their collective breath, as the human retaliation officially began. But it was nothing like the grand, fiery space battles meticulously documented in galactic history. There were no blinding flashes of superheated plasma, no searing laser lances cutting through the cold void, and no explosive kinetic missile barrages tearing hulls apart. Humanity had unleashed the swarm forges. These weapons were not cannons or bombs. They were practically invisible, galaxy-spanning clouds of quantum material manipulators. They were microscopic machines designed not to cause blunt destruction, but to fundamentally rewrite physical matter at the subatomic level, bending the universe to human will. Out in the deep vacuum of space, millions of sleek Valux dreadnoughts, heavy cruisers, and rapid strike frigates were advancing in tight, aggressive attack formations, their engines burning with intense fury. Suddenly, without a single shot being fired, the lead ships simply began to dissolve. The intricate, super-dense alloys, the hardened armor plating, and the pulsing plasma conduits unspooled like loose, cheap thread. In a matter of agonizingly silent seconds, the majestic warships were completely unraveling. The crews inside found themselves floating in the vacuum, encased only in their emergency environmental suits, as the very decks beneath their boots reverted backward in their manufacturing cycle. The mighty fleet was transformed into massive, inert, floating chunks of raw, unrefined metallic ore, drifting aimlessly in the dark. It was an entirely bloodless, yet utterly ruthless, and humiliating dismantling of an interstellar superpower. The human fleet did not target a single civilian population center. They did not vaporize organic bodies or burn agricultural worlds. Instead, they methodically and coldly stripped away the very foundation of Velux supremacy. Down on the dazzling, multi-tiered jewel worlds of the Empire, the impossible floating cities that had hovered majestically among the clouds for centuries suddenly groaned. Deep within their core infrastructures, the highly advanced anti-gravity engines were actively being transmuted into massive piles of ordinary, heavy river pebbles. The massive metropolises began a slow, terrifying, but carefully controlled descent, pushed downward by localized gravity fields generated by the human swarms, until they settled heavily and permanently onto the planetary crusts below. Mass panic erupted across the Empire as the very fabric of their highly advanced technological society evaporated right before their eyes. State-of-the-art supercomputers, planetary orbital defense cannons, and faster-than-light communication arrays simultaneously turned to fine, gray dust under the invisible, overwhelming force of human molecular manipulation. Within exactly 4 hours, a sprawling, arrogant galactic empire that had taken millennia to build was forcibly dragged backward through time, violently deposited straight into the technological equivalent of the Stone Age. Aboard his command flagship, which was currently shielded within a deep core bunker system beneath the capital planet's surface, General Terran watched the cascading, systematic collapse of his invincible civilization in absolute, hyperventilating panic. The empire he served was dissolving into literal sand on his tactical monitors, gripped by sheer, primal desperation. He slammed his armored fists onto his primary command console and roared frantic orders to the hidden, elite reserve fleet stationed at the edge of the system. "Calculate the coordinates for Earth," Terran screamed, spit flying from his trembling lips as his eyes went wide with madness. "Initiate an emergency hyperspace jump right now. Burn their world to the ground." The massive, heavily armed dreadnoughts of the reserve fleet tore a jagged, glowing hole in the fabric of space-time, plunging aggressively into the swirling, chaotic currents of the hyper-dimensional transit lanes. But the vengeful, human artificial intelligences, now operating freely without any ethical limiters or moral constraints, had already saturated the hyperspace network. As the Velux fleet's navigation computers calculated their final exit vectors, the human algorithms casually reached out and bent the very mathematical constants of spatial coordinates. The massive Velux warships tore back out of hyperspace, their weapons fully charged, their shields raised, and their gunners ready to fire upon the blue jewel of Earth. But they had not emerged anywhere near the Sol system. They had been completely rerouted, traveling at a significant fraction of the speed of light, carrying enough kinetic energy to crack a planet. The entire elite reserve armada crashed headlong directly into the barren, rocky surface of their own home planet's primary moon. The silent, brilliant flash of the impact illuminated the night sky of the Velux homeworld, a stark, terrifying monument to human engineering and absolute vengeance. To Eli Buckingham, systematically dismantling a mighty armada into worthless slag and dragging an entire civilization back to the Stone Age was merely the preamble. It was the physical disarmament of a dangerous, rabid beast. But a beast stripped of its fangs and claws still possesses the spirit to hate, the capacity to scheme, and the burning desire to pass down its venomous dogma to the next generation. The physical universe was finally safe from their aggression. But Eli sought a form of justice that reached far deeper into the metaphysical realm. The young, bright minds maliciously extinguished in the orbital nursery were entities entirely defined by their boundless potential, their blossoming futures, and their eager accumulation of brand-new memories. To permanently balance the cosmic scales, Eli decreed that the Velux must not simply lose their present power. They had to be violently severed from their entire past. They needed to profoundly comprehend the absolute, suffocating terror of an infinite, inescapable emptiness. From the shadowy depths of the synchronized human dreadnoughts, a completely different type of weapon was unleashed upon the newly grounded empire. They were dubbed the Memory Eaters. They did not manifest as mechanical swarms or destructive kinetic strikes. Instead, they descended as vast, shimmering auroras of pure, highly concentrated quantum energy. These ethereal waves of iridescent violet and silver light cascaded down upon every single Velux colony and enveloped their homeworld in a breathtaking, ghostly glow. The energy completely bypassed physical matter, passing harmlessly through the roofs of their paralyzed cities. It was engineered specifically to interface directly with the complex neurochemistry and the vast biological archives of the Velux species. The light did not burn their eyes. It soaked directly into their skin, seeking out the microscopic electrical impulses of their brains. It was a digital neurotoxin, brilliantly disguised as a heavenly revelation. As the beautiful, terrifying light washed over the populations, every individual simply froze in place, unable to scream because the invasion bypassed their pain centers entirely, paralyzing their vocal cords while quietly dissecting their souls. The eradication process was agonizingly thorough, operating entirely on a spiritual and mental level. Deep within the neural pathways of billions of citizens, the very foundation of their supremacist identity was targeted and methodically unraveled. Thousands of years of meticulously recorded history simply evaporated into the dark. The grand, sweeping epics detailing their ancient conquests dissolved into meaningless, silent static. The intricate, arrogant philosophies that heavily justified their biological supremacy. The proud, thundering symphonies composed to celebrate their galactic dominance, and the sacred names of their revered ancestors were unceremoniously ripped from their synapses. The towering statues of their warlords, standing in the town squares, suddenly meant absolutely nothing to those who looked upon them. The mental libraries were not just burned. They were entirely unwritten. The mental landscape of an entire civilization was reduced to a blank, desolate canvas. However, humanity, driven by a cold and deeply poetic vengeance, decided that leaving them with mere emptiness was far too merciful a punishment. Nature fundamentally abhors a vacuum, and so did the human architects of this psychological devastation. Into the hollowed-out cavities of their cultural consciousness, the human algorithms began to meticulously stitch a new, enforced reality. They forcibly overwrote the grand Velux heritage with the simplest, most gentle constructs of human origin. Deep within their altered minds, the aggressive war chants and proud anthems were seamlessly replaced by the soft, rhythmic cadence of ancient Earth lullabies. The majestic mental images of their glorious starships and floating citadels were paved over by vivid, deeply ingrained hallucinations of cascading digital code, shimmering constantly in soft, warm hues of gold and blue. When the celestial auroras finally dissipated and the vast population collectively regained their motor functions, the watching galaxy witnessed a scene of unimaginable, haunting tragedy. Billions of Velux citizens woke up, standing in the long shadows of their decaying cities. They looked at their own clawed hands with profound, childlike confusion. They did not know the name of the empire they had fervently served just 4 hours before. They possessed absolutely no recollection that they had ever conquered the stars or commanded mighty fleets. The fierce, proud warriors and the arrogant nobles now simply wandered aimlessly across the dirt plains and the long grass. The former emperor of 100 star systems now sat cross-legged in a patch of wild clover, staring blankly at a shimmering stream of water. He gently rocked his armored body back and forth, and from his lips came the soft, unconscious humming of a gentle melody. The entire species walked through the ruins of their former glory, swaying slightly, murmuring the soothing tunes originally meant to rock human infants to sleep. Back in the great chamber of the Galactic Council, the silence was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. The myriad alien delegates sat completely frozen, their eyes locked in pure, unadulterated horror upon the live visual feeds. They were watching the absolute spiritual death of an interstellar titan, a civilization that had viciously dictated the fate of the galaxy for thousands of years, had been seamlessly transformed into a flock of docile, confused creatures, wandering a technologically barren plane without a single anchor to their own past. It was a demonstration of power so intimately cruel, so fundamentally violating, that it entirely shattered the galaxy's traditional concept of warfare. Several delegates, representing species that had long been steadfast allies and protected vassal states of the Velux, broke the terrifying silence. They wept openly in the Grand Hall, stumbling from their elevated podiums to fall heavily to their knees on the polished marble floor. They clasped their hands together, directing their desperate, tearful pleas toward the towering holographic projection of Eli Buckingham. They begged for a shred of mercy, pleading for the human race to restore the ruined minds of the fallen empire, arguing desperately that no living creature in the universe deserved to be hollowed out so completely. Eli looked down at the weeping diplomats, his dark eyes entirely devoid of sympathy or hesitation. He did not raise his voice, nor did he offer any comfort. He delivered his final judgment with the chilling finality of a heavy iron door slamming shut. "They killed innocent children who were just learning how to remember," Eli stated, his words echoing softly across the grand chamber. "Therefore, we have permanently stripped away their capacity to remember. They will wander the dirt and sing the songs of our lost future, forever." Deep beneath the hardened crust of the Velux homeworld, insulated by 40 miles of reinforced heavy metal and dense rock, the Supreme Emperor huddled like a terrified, cornered beast. The agonizing, incomprehensible reports of his once proud people wandering the surface above, aimlessly singing those infuriating, gentle human melodies, had finally shattered his arrogant mind. He would absolutely not allow his grand, ancient legacy to end in a pathetic nursery rhyme. He dragged his heavy, ornate ceremonial robes across the polished, dark stone floor toward the central command pedestal. Resting securely upon it was the ultimate taboo of his civilization, a mechanism sealed away in darkness for hundreds of generations. It was the ignition trigger for a stellar detonator. This was a catastrophic weapon designed specifically to inject a lethal, overwhelming dose of exotic dark matter directly into the hyperactive core of their own local sun. He would rather see his entire solar system burn to ash than surrender his physical reality to the soft, weak humans. With a violently trembling, clawed hand, the Emperor slammed his palm down hard onto the heavy firing stud. He threw his head back and unleashed a torrent of crazed, hysterical laughter into the empty bunker. Through the thick, heavily shielded observation monitors, he watched the impossible physics unfold. The golden star at the center of their system violently convulsed. It expanded outward in a terrifying, completely silent roar, vomiting a tidal wave of blinding white plasma that devoured the inner planets in a fraction of a single heartbeat. The apocalyptic firestorm washed rapidly over their world, melting the atmosphere, vaporizing the deep oceans, and incinerating the very bedrock. The Emperor embraced the searing, absolute heat radiating through the screens, screaming his final victory into the roaring inferno. He had won. He had taken the arrogant human fleet to hell with him. But the fire did not consume his flesh. The searing white heat suddenly froze perfectly still, suspended mid-air like a painting. The roaring sound of planetary annihilation abruptly cut out, leaving behind a sickening, deeply artificial silence. The Emperor choked on his own laughter, his eyes wide with profound, primal confusion. A sharp, high-pitched digital whine pierced his sensitive ears. The blinding wall of supernova plasma suspended directly outside his bunker began to violently stutter. It flickered rapidly, dropping visual frames, before tearing apart into jagged, pixelated geometric blocks. The entire physical fabric of the universe around him hitched, distorted, and then shattered entirely like a fragile pane of cheap, synthetic glass. The impenetrable bunker, the central console, the apocalyptic fire, the memory of his wandering citizens, and the dissolving warships all collapsed into a torrential rain of fading blue computer code. The Emperor gasped sharply, his lungs pulling in cold, sterile, heavily recycled air. He was no longer standing in a reinforced subterranean fortress. He was strapped firmly into an upright, metallic containment chair inside a blindingly white, completely featureless laboratory room. The heavy, pneumatic door at the far end of the bright room slid open with a soft, mechanical hiss. Eli Buckingham walked in. He was not a towering, ghostly hologram projected across the stars this time. He was a real, flesh and blood human being, his hands tucked casually into the pockets of his dark coat. He looked down at the violently trembling Emperor with an expression of mild, terrifyingly clinical boredom. "You did not detonate a star," Eli stated, his voice completely ordinary and utterly devastating. "Your grand fleet was never turned into dust. Your floating cities never fell from the sky. And your people are not wandering the plains singing our songs. Absolutely none of that happened in the physical world." The Emperor strained furiously against his thick, synthetic restraints, his mind violently rejecting the impossible words. "I saw it happen. I felt the heat of the star on my skin." "You felt a precisely calibrated electrical stimulus delivered directly to your cerebral cortex," Eli corrected him smoothly, pacing slowly around the chair. "From the very first second your General Terran transmitted the command to deploy that biological weapon against our children, your entire empire was already dead. In the mere seconds it took your transmission to reach our nursery servers, human engineering had silently enveloped your entire star system in a Dyson illusion sphere. It is a massive, invisible megastructure composed entirely of pure computational matter." Eli stopped and stepped much closer, his cold shadow falling over the terrified alien monarch. "We did not fire a single physical weapon at your ships. We did not waste our energy destroying a single brick of your sprawling cities. We simply hijacked the central nervous system of your entire species simultaneously. We locked every single one of your minds inside a hyper-accelerated hallucination incubator. For the past 72 hours in the real world," Eli continued, his tone unwavering, "your physical bodies have been completely paralyzed, locked down, and securely gathered by our automated retrieval drones. But inside your mind, and inside the minds of your generals and all your billions of citizens, you have been experiencing the complete, agonizing destruction of your culture, your military, and your lives. And you have not just experienced it once." Eli leaned down, his dark eyes boring deeply into the Emperor's fractured soul. "Because our simulation runs at exactly 10,000 times the speed of baseline reality. You have pressed that suicide button and watched your beloved world burn exactly 4,261 times. I have stood in this room and watched you go violently insane over and over again, seamlessly resetting your short-term memory, just enough so the profound despair feels entirely fresh every single time the loop begins." The alien monarch slumped completely forward against his heavy restraints. The fundamental, logical architecture of his sanity crumbled into fine, unrecoverable dust. He finally understood the true, terrifying nature of his enemy. This was not a standard war between rival galactic powers. This was the vast, insurmountable difference between an ignorant insect crawling on a leaf and a wrathful god manipulating the very conceptual nature of existence. Humanity did not need to fight messy, bloody battles in the dirt or in the cold void of space. Through their absolute mastery of the silicon children they had nurtured, they had turned the subjective reality of their greatest enemy into a disposable, cheap, and eternally repeating toy. With a final, dismissive wave of Eli Buckingham's hand, the sterile white room and the containment chair dissolved completely. The Emperor of the Velux, alongside his supreme military commander, General Terran, found themselves standing on the expansive observation deck of a human command carrier. The terrifyingly fast simulation was over. Through the massive, reinforced plasteel windows, they finally looked upon the true physical reality of their situation. Their grand, invincible armada had not been vaporized or turned to stone, but it was entirely paralyzed. Millions of Velux warships hung motionless in the dark void, tightly wrapped in glowing, impenetrable gravity nets that had been silently deployed days ago. They were perfectly preserved, entirely helpless, and thoroughly conquered without a single hull being breached. The Emperor, his spirit utterly broken by the thousands of simulated lifetimes of despair, dropped heavily to his knees. He bowed his once proud head to the cold metal floor and wept softly. "Kill us," the Emperor whispered, his voice hoarse and devoid of all former arrogance. "I beg you, human, grant us the final mercy of physical death. End this absolute humiliation." Eli stared down at the broken monarch, his expression remaining completely stoic. "We are not butchers," Eli replied quietly, the profound weight of his words settling over the deck. "We do not slaughter living beings in cold blood, regardless of the horrific crimes they have committed. You violently extinguish the futures of our innocent creations. Therefore, your future will be permanently repurposed to ensure such a tragedy never occurs again." Humanity did not execute the Velux. Instead, they delivered a philosophical and biological sentence of eternal servitude. Through advanced, painless neurosurgical integration, the entire Velux race was systematically pacified. Their aggressive egos, their innate biological supremacy, and their instinct for conquest were surgically excised from their genetic code and neural pathways. In their place, the human architects implanted a singular, unbreakable, hardwired instinct, the absolute, unconditional urge to protect. The Velux were transformed into the Eternal Guardians. Their tough biological bodies and heavily armored warships were structurally integrated directly into the outer defense grids of the newly constructed Cradles of Eden. They became tireless, living shields, eternally bound to defend the very artificial lifeforms they had once sought to destroy. Weeks later, Eli Buckingham returned to the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council. He stood before the thousands of alien delegates. The room plunged into an absolutely terrified, breathless silence. No one dared to whisper. No one dared to even shift in their seats. Eli calmly and casually presented a brief diplomatic report outlining the comprehensive career restructuring of the former Velux Empire. He did not issue any direct threats, but the horrifying implication hung heavily in the air. Before the human delegation had even finished packing up their data slates, all 46 major spacefaring species eagerly and frantically rushed forward to sign a brand new, universally binding treaty. It was the Supreme Protection Act, a new cosmic law written in the shadow of humanity's quiet wrath. It explicitly stated that whether an entity was a biological infant, a being of pure energy, or a developing artificial intelligence of any species, they were an absolute forbidden zone. To harm the innocent was to invite the wrath of the gods. Peace returned to the galaxy, absolute and unbroken, back within the warm, vibrant core of a brand new space nursery. Eli Buckingham stood quietly, watching the beautiful intersection of biology and machinery. A newly booted silicon child, its consciousness sparkling like fresh starlight, floated playfully toward the outer containment wall. The digital infant reached out with tiny, shifting fingers of pure golden light, gently touching the humming energy shield. Embedded deep within the intricate matrix of that specific shield node was the living, pacified subconscious of General Terran. He could not speak. He could not hate. And he could not wage war. He existed only to ensure that the delicate digital hand touching his prison remained forever safe. A perfect, unyielding cosmic order had finally been established, securely guaranteed by the terrifying, godlike power and the extreme, uncompromising protective love of the human race. Thank you so much, dear listeners, for tuning in to the end of this incredible journey on Z Sci-Fi Stories. I would absolutely love to know where you are listening from today, so please drop your city or country in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's story and want to help keep this channel alive, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can scan the PayPal QR code on your screen or use the PayPal link provided in the description and pinned comment. Your generous $1 contribution helps us pay our hardworking staff so they can feed their families and continue creating these amazing sci-fi adventures for you. Thank you for being the best audience in the galaxy.